Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Sex Addiction in the News on Facebook Live, Fridays at 5. I am Stacy Sprout, licensed therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, author of my own story called Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary infinities. I'm here with my co-host, Rocky Sprout, Sparky's brother. We'll see how this goes tonight. Rocky's kind of a guard dog, but tonight he's pretty chill. Thanks for joining us tonight. I have a very special and esteemed guest. I feel very honored to be sharing this time with Marnie Ferree. And Marnie, I will let you introduce yourself, tell us more about yourself. But I do want to say that what it's like to be a female sex addict and looking for resources and finding nothing or very little. It's very painful, as you know, and we'll talk more about the isolation and stigma that women face. And you changed that for me and many, many, many women. And I'm getting some little hearts across the screen on the Facebook Live. So just know that I speak for many when I want to express my gratitude to you for your courage and your pioneer efforts and your steadfast just fight to teach people about sex addiction in general and in women and in the many facets. Someone had just... Lacey Bentley is on the line, and she had a comment that you changed that for many of us, and I think she's talking about that isolation. And so your work has truly created community in a global way that wasn't there before. And so thank you so much.
You're welcome, Stacy. I'm really glad to be with you. Today, I would say I am a grateful recovering sex lover relationship addict. I really am. I have felt that way for almost since the beginning. It, for me, was super freeing to have a therapist who understood this. And in 1991, my therapist was one of maybe a couple of dozen people in the country who had gone to Golden Valley Health Center and trained with Dr. Patrick Carnes. So that was just such a blessing because she immediately knew. She got me. She understood the trauma, all the sexual abuse I'd experienced. She understood all the family systems and family dysfunction and generational stuff. But she also understood that I was desperate and I was a sex-loving relationship addict. And so, some people, especially I find some women, find those labels really pejorative or off-putting. And I do talk in my book about how the label sex addict, it is a hard one. And yet at the same time, I think labels they're shorthand. And for me, it was kind of encouraging that others, when I started in 1991, that there were some other books, which at least told me this is a big enough issue that people are writing books about it. Mm-hmm. And I also, as I eventually got to know Pat Carnes and I got to know Mark Laser, and his counterpart in the Christian, I said, "You've written great books, and the pronouns are all wrong." So it was just, it's good. It's been good for me to be able to know that I'm not alone, because I thought I was the only one, and I still hear that today. I heard this week a woman calling saying, "Really, there's this whole program for female sex addicts?" I had no idea. And I said, "Oh, there are lots and lots and lots of us." So it's been my honor and my privilege to be the pioneer. God called me in 1991, even before sobriety, which is really odd, but God uses us when we're still super messed up, and in some ways I still am, I'm sure, as certain people in my life at least, but a missionary to women, and I love getting to do that.
Well, it shows. So thanks for your passion. And the whole wounded healer thing. I've been looking at my time and my balance and workaholism and just,
Sure.
I don't have to have it all together to try to be of service. And that's,
Right.
I think that's a great message. I mean, it's important to take care of ourselves and figure out how to do that. But part of that is listening. We have a calling, listening to that. And
Right.
we're always striving for balance. But so you mentioned lots of things I want to talk with you about more. So you mentioned your book, and your book is called No Stones: Women Redeemed from Sexual Shame. And I have an older version here,
Yes.
No
Yes.
Stones. I see a newer version behind you. Oh, there you go.
Yes. And I actually have a newer version. And when it was let me get it, see if I can get it in the camera. There you go. When it was picked up by a Christian publisher in 2010, and the name at that point was changed to Women Redeemed from Sexual Addiction. When I published it, self-published in 2002, titled it Sexual Shame, because I thought at that point, still no woman is going to pick up a book that on the cover says sexual addiction. And shame is the driver, I think, for all of us. So a little bit of an updated title, but it's been around a long time now.
And how did you like that change? Did it feel like it was kind of getting up with the times to change?
Yeah. Yeah, it just felt like we need to start putting women and sex addiction in the same sentence, because how are we ever going to get over the shame if people like me who are already crazy enough to be so out there aren't saying this is the issue I struggle with? Of course, it's a different conversation. We know that sex addiction isn't really a very descriptive term, because this is an attachment-based intimacy disorder. But that doesn't go well on a book title. So,
yeah, it's harder for people, I think, to get a sense of like what intimacy disorder, attachment,
right.
Like. But when you say sexual shame or sex addiction, which is getting more and more popular use,
right.
it does start to tap into something that people can put together.
Right.
It can be terrifying, and they can put it together with sex offenses. We're still working on, how do those separate out?
Right.
Yeah. So I want to talk about prevalence of sex addiction in women. So this is something that I've been studying because I've been doing more media on the topic. And
right.
I hadn't looked at this part of your book for a while. And when I was preparing for the show, I went back and I looked at, and because I have the older version, I want to, and I have you here. I'm like, okay, I want to get this straight. So here, prevalence, you talk about that Carnes initially suggested 6 to 10% of the United States adult population is sexually addicted. Estimates now range as high as 45%. So that was in, I think, the Facing the Shadows, or it could have been Out of the Shadows. Of that number, probably 40 to 50% are females. So what do you think about that? What do you think about those numbers today?
I'm actually a little bit embarrassed because there's still no real good research, and there wasn't when I wrote those numbers to start with. There's a lot more research today, of course, about who at least is looking at internet pornography, because that's tracked and there are analytics about that.
Yeah.
So I hope that I made it a little more clear in that book that that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, estimates.
As an estimate, I think Carnes and ITAP, International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, that's the certifying body for both of us for the CSAT certification and kind of a leader in this field, of course, is saying more, maybe 3 to 7%, I read somewhere recently, of the adult population. I think the reality is we don't know. It's like, how many alcoholics are there? Were there tons of functional alcoholics? Do they count? Do they not count?
Yeah.
How do we measure them? The ones who go to treatment, there are lots more who never ever go to treatment, never even go to 12 steps or something. So I don't know that they're good statistics. What I do know is for a long time, and I'm pretty sure I talked about it in the revised version in 2010, but I think maybe I talked about it in that original one that you're holding, which, by the way, is just dear to me, is that 1/3 at least of people who are visiting pornography sites are women. And so I think that statistic is holding true. I think that's only gonna go up as the younger generation, not even my daughter's generation anymore, but the next generation of college age young women, or sometimes even high school age before her, they're doing the same things that men have done for a long time. But what I really believe, and I think it's going to be true in my lifetime, I'm 62. So I still think I've got a few more good years in me, that we'll see that probably women struggle with sex addiction, and generally speaking, about the same rate as men. I mean, by now we say probably 40%, maybe even 50% of alcoholics, not necessarily treatment seeking, but the people who have a difficulty with some kind of substance are women. And I think we'll find that with men too.
Well, I agree with you.
With about men and women in the ratios about this sexual issue as well.
Yep, that it balances out when you start factoring in the variables of if you think of sex addiction as an umbrella term, and you're including relationship addiction in there.
Yes.
And
yes.
Most of the research is biased toward kind of the classic sex addiction behaviors. So most of the research underreports for women because of the very questions they ask. And then if you start factoring in the porn, like you said, so I just got the statistic from this beautiful site called the G Spot, and G stands for Grace. So the site is, I think it's the Grace Spot. And these two women are just openly talking about pornography addiction in women. And they said 33% of all porn users are women, and 17% of those consider themselves addicted to porn. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to figure this out with U.S. population statistics, and I guess it's not a great way to do it because if they're including children, but the research is about adults, so I somehow have to find a way to narrow it down. But just looking at that, I mean, half the U.S. population, 166 million women, if we're looking at women and girls, it's like 17% of that. That's 28 million women. So if we take out girls, but that's just 17%. That's, it's.
I can't do that kind of math. What I know of what I think really matters, there are tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of women who struggle with this. And I'm glad that we're beginning to talk about it. Yeah. Now in the popular media, you and I were on a panel back in May with two young women who are way out there in the media, one with the book and the other with the movie. And again, I don't really do media, but there was some famous movie star or TV star or somebody recently within the last week or so who came out talking about her experience that at a point in her life, she says she was probably addicted to sex. We need more women who are talking about it. And that's what's so important.
Well, so if we can agree, there's millions of women. Like I think yes. We won't have an exact amount, but we are in the millions of category. I think it's a funny story how I was talking with you on the phone about female sex and love addiction, and you said what we really need is a very famous woman to come out and say that she has a sex addiction, and the very next day the media blew up with Jada Pinkett Smith on her Facebook live show saying she definitely had a sex addiction. She felt sex was the solution to all her problems. And so I found that really, really cool. You called it and out it came. And Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, has come out publicly in writing calling herself a seduction addict.
I had not heard that.
Yeah, that was a few years ago before her divorce. And so it just, there are women who are brave and speaking out, and the more, as you say, the more widely known there are, the bigger reduction of shame that that can come out. Well, tell me about when you redid your book. So you had a new title. So 2002 to 2010. What changed? What were some of the things that you wanted to update? I know one in particular that's very personal in terms of what you included.
Actually, very, very little changed between those two editions, really. I think all the core principles and things are the same. I talked a little bit more about pornography and online and those kinds of things because there's quite an explosion from 2002 to 2010 about those issues. I talked about attachment more. I added Marilyn Murray's model about 3 parts of self that I've adapted to be the 3 bears in their 3 chairs. but just looking about our authentic self and our wounded self and our coping self. But not much really changed. But you told me a sweet story before we went live about something about what struck you about it.
Well, two things. So one of them, I mean, this one is in the earlier book also, which is your daughter's letter.
Yes.
So if you don't know, if you haven't read No Stones, there is a letter in the front. It's called A Letter to the Reader. And it's written by Marnie's daughter. So now we're looking at not just the pioneer female sex addict coming out to educate others, but her daughter joining her to educate about the family legacy of recovery. And of course, that topic is so near and dear to my heart because my mother got into recovery when I was 9. And we actually did a public speaking engagement together, my mom and I. And then I've seen you with your daughter. You did a presentation for therapists, and that was a wonderful presentation where you talked about what it was like to mother her, parent her, and be dealing with addiction and be out in the world. And she talked about what that was like as a girl growing into be a young woman. And she's a beautiful young woman, and it was so great. And so this letter to the reader, there's one paragraph that I really wanted to read because it's so touching. So your daughter says, "This book gave me insight that mere words," I'm going to just cry here.
No, we're both going to cry, Stacy.
Because I think it actually is how I feel about my mom too. But it's also, there's this love and forgiveness that I think touches me as a recovering woman, you know, that the true concept of redemption is just coming through the lineage here. So anyway, she writes, "This book gave me insights that mere words could never express. I learned why my mom acted how she did, and that she had no intention of hurting me, my brother, or my dad." I mean, that is amazing grace to see that. I learned that there is reason behind the madness. And I learned that a person's past can not simply be forgotten or written off as unimportant because it truly has a significant impact on the future.
That was such a dear thing. I'm so proud of her. She was 18, maybe 19 at most when she wrote that.
This is so wise.
So it was so sweet. And she actually now works with me here at Bethesda Workshops. She is on our team, our administrative team, and talks with people and does lots of logistics and things. So it's really, really sweet to be working now full-time together with her in ministry and clinical work to try to help other people. It's really awesome.
That is so beautiful. And I know so heartening to the women who are watching this or will be watching it on YouTube who worry about the impact on their daughters and what's happened and can it be healed or and I guess that's my testimony too, is that the reason I'm even doing this kind of education is because my mom got into recovery and she was very open about it. And she modeled that to me, and that you could do that and be okay.
And I would absolutely say to women who are so fearful that they have really messed up their kids, the first thing I would say would be forget saving for college, just save for therapy.
But, the child's therapy fund, yes.
Yeah, but much more seriously, the best gift we can give our children or our grandchildren, I'm a grand Marnie, which is the most wonderful thing ever, is to do our own work, is to do the hard work, to begin telling the truth, to do it in a age appropriate and a non-emotionally incestuous way where we're not expecting our daughters to take care of us or to tell us that we're good moms or anything like that. But it's just a process that gets played out, just one teachable moment or one authentic moment or connected moment at a time. And healing happens.
Well, thank you both for including that. And I'm wondering, so I think what I was referring to about the update, you added more of your own story in your 2010 version. And I'm just, you know, you've been very generous with your story. So you started out just breaking the news in the newspaper in Tennessee, and you got an incredible response to that. And then
that was in 1993.
1993.
So I've only been sober a year. I don't necessarily recommend that, but it it ended up working, and I was a journalist at the time, so I had an amazing, very unique platform for the role that I had with the paper. But it was amazing. It was
Can you tell us more about what that was and what the response was?
I did a series for the Tennessean called Spoken Secrets. And the series was really about childhood sexual abuse. And as far as we can document anywhere, it was the first time in major media like the newspaper, certainly any kind of video type media, where adults were telling, using their full names on the record, full page photos, their own stories of childhood sexual abuse. And there were 5 of us. And it ran on 5 Sundays, consecutive Sundays beginning in August. And just this unbelievable thousands of responses really that came into the paper about it. As there were 4 women, there was 1 man, and there was 1 woman of color. And so it was really amazing that as these individuals were telling their stories, I was bringing in both the interview of the stories, and they had a beautiful photographer, did really wonderful pictures of the folks. But I was bringing in clinical things so that each segment was talking about a certain, their kind of factor around sexual abuse or after effect or different kinds of things. And I told my stories the last segment in the series, and I talked about the connection between childhood sexual abuse and later addictive behavior, especially sex addiction. So it was, I am probably that and the first copy of No Stones, I consider the things I have been most blessed to get to do professionally, because it was really wonderful.
And you had a lot of positive responses back in the very first with the Tennessean, the series that you did. It was kind of like an early Me Too, but we didn't have social media to get it spread so widely. But in terms of the feedback you got.
Right. Yeah. And my family was very well known in Nashville. My father, who's now deceased, was extremely a public figure. And so to have me, as someone whose family was well known, come out saying these things have happened to me was also kind of quite the shock factor and a novelty. And that, in a positive way, helped spread the word about the issue of child sexual abuse and possibility of healing.
Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for your courage. And that's how so many women and men start to feel like they're not the only ones.
Right.
So, and how, in terms of No Stones, and even in 2010 when you added more of your own story, how have people received you then? Did you ever have negative impacts, or has it been pretty uniformly welcoming, positive?
Yeah. It's been the latter. I've been blessed that pretty much across the board, with almost no exceptions that I'm aware of. Now, people may say all kinds of stuff about me behind my back, and I can't do anything about that. My recovery tells me it's none of my business, but that's hard to put in practice. But in terms of anything that has come my way, the response has been astonishingly positive. It really is. And I'm not sure about that, other than I am a woman of Christian faith, and the God of my understanding is in charge of those things. And I really think it was just clearly God's call for me that I was supposed to do this. You mentioned a time or two about being courageous. People tell me that. I have never really felt that. It wasn't a matter of having the courage to do it. It was a matter of I couldn't not do it.
Yeah.
It just was. And fortunately, I have been blessed and gotten lots of support, and I'm very grateful for that.
I'm glad to hear it. I guess what I relate to is, the only thing more scary than following the calling is not following it.
Right.
I've learned. I've just learned that when the inspiration hits like that, for me, I need to do that. That's a sense of purpose, and it becomes so vital. I was just thinking about something that you wrote in No Stones. It was a quote that I related to. The truth is that I didn't choose the field of sex addiction as my life's work. In reality, sex addiction chose me.
Right. That's how it is. That's how it feels. But what's also true, Stacy, is healing chose me.
So recovery and healing chose
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Because there are lots and lots of really wounded, messed up people, and I for sure was one of them. And not everyone chooses healing. And I felt like that healing chose me. And it was hard at times for me to choose healing back because parts of the journey have been very, very difficult, including in recovery. I really kind of thought that recovery would take care of all my problems, you know, and that's not true. I think what recovery does is what spirituality also does in my life. It gives us tools and a foundation and a comfort and a possibility of dealing with life on life's terms in a different way than we had before. But there's still problems. There today and for a long time. Thank you, recovery. The problems don't come because I'm not living in integrity, at least certainly not around sex or relationship or those kinds of things. My challenges are more what you mentioned earlier, self-care and different similar things like that. But it's not because I'm acting out in sexual or relationship ways. And so that definitely does simplify your life in positive ways to be living in authenticity and integrity in it. But it doesn't take away all the problems. But so we get to choose healing every day, and that's a good thing.
So I'm curious about your opinion about something. What do you think about the idea of healing, recovering, healed, recovered? I'm curious about, because what I heard you say is, you know, you're not struggling with sexual integrity today. You know who you are, and you have your choices, and you make them, and they're in line. So I'm just wondering, yeah, if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I know that in recovery circles, there are different thoughts about the nomenclature and am I recovering? Am I recovered? Once an addict, always an addict. How does that work? Within my Christian circles, then we add in some spiritual stuff about, you know, I'm a new person in Christ or these kinds of things. And I think for me, it's kind of all of the above. It is helpful to me to think about myself as a huge part of my history is both as a sexual trauma survivor and as a sex and love addict. That those reminders are helpful to me because I don't want to live in those places today. At the same time, there's really not that struggle, but what has helped, I am deeply committed to a core inner group of sisters, and we do life together. And we meet face to face every week, and in a very, very connected and supportive and attached way. And that makes all the difference in the world. And I will tell you, I don't struggle with sex addiction. And within the last few months, one of my primary acting out partners and a person I really deeply, deeply cared about, it was his birthday. And it's been many, 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 many years. And on his birthday, I thought of him and thought of him and thought of him until finally I could remember, you know what? I can turn him over to God. Mm. I can wish him well and send him into the universe. And it is certainly not helpful in any way for me to try to figure out where is he now and what's happening with him now and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, this is real. So does that mean I'm recovering, whatever? I don't know. It means I hope that I'm human. And I could also reach out to some people and say, I am really having obsessions about a person today. And I'm powerless over that. And I choose to turn that to God. And now what I'm going to do the next right thing.
Beautiful. Thank you for that story. I appreciate your vulnerability and just acknowledging, that's not an episode that you chose. It was an anniversary, and from the inside, your mind was working on that, and that's yeah. Um, so if I know it is something that people talk about as don't say you're recovered because you don't want to lose the humility of things
Right.
like that can happen, not with your intention but from the inside, maybe from just a corner of a place that just you didn't know was there. And
Right.
then the key is to how do we intervene, as you said. And so you had your turning it over, your spiritual intervention, and so
And reaching out to some other people.
and reaching out to others and talking about what was going on.
Right.
So breaking your secret and yeah.
Right.
Yep. Well, I think, for me, when I speak, sometimes people ask that question because I wrote my book and I talked about it being a temporary insanity and
Right.
talking about myself as recovered following the pioneers of AA and their public media. And I think that where that's been difficult for some people is it's scary because it's like, well, that's a setup for relapse if you lose your humility. And don't rest, don't forget that those kinds of things can happen. And for me, it's about trying to work a life of recovery and intervention. So it's not, I mean, if I say like I don't struggle with sex addiction today, it's more like if something were to come up like that for me, I just know what to do with it now.
Right.
It's not like I have an iron fist, it would never come up or happen, but like I can pray, I can surrender, I can call people, I can journal, I can go to therapy, I just have so many tools thanks to
Right.
recovery, and
Right.
I can remember them, or if I forget them, pretty soon I'm bumping into somebody who's reminding me because
Right.
I have people around me who are on that journey, and so. But I like what you said about the and. I think that's what I'm coming to more and more is it's not either or, but I like also the message that we don't have to suffer for the rest of our lives in this locked in this hyper vigilant relationship with this part of ourselves that we just hate and try to keep suppressed like that. Working with the what's going on inside becomes part of finding freedom from it. And I know that you do that in your workshops. So you mentioned earlier Bethesda workshops, and we've got the link on the web here or on the Facebook post here. But can you tell us a little bit more about what you do there and how does it go and how does it help women? I know you work with women and men, but go for it.
Right. Right. Bethesda workshops started in 1997, the beginning of what today's Bethesda workshops, with this similar model, but it was for female sex, love, and relationship addicts, and it was called Healing for Women. And long story about that, but again, another God story in my life. And that year, I think we treated 35 women who all thought that they were the only one. And so around 2000, 2001, Bethesda workshops began treating partners of addicts, which were all wives at that point, and male sex addicts and couples. And so the program has just expanded. We're in Nashville, Tennessee, and people come from all across the country, the way they do to any treatment center. We are a very short-term program, just 3.5 days, Wednesday through Saturday. And obviously that's not going to fix anything or cure anything, but we are very intense. We do 10 to 12 clinical hours every full day.
That's amazing.
So within that time period of 3.5 days, people are getting 30 to 35 clinical hours of help from really gifted and highly trained and certified and qualified clinicians, many of whom have their own journey of healing and their own journey of recovery, including many of them around sexual addiction as either addicts or partners. So it's a very eclectic model. We really do believe in the power of looking at the roots, I called it that in No Stones, of these issues of looking at family systems, of looking at trauma, of looking at attachment breaches. Today, we're adding more looking at culture, because today the culture is the wounder for so many of these younger individuals, younger women. The culture is just so messed up in its messages about femininity, about beauty, about body, all those kinds of things. It impacts guys as well. But so we're really looking at that. We're looking at trying to reduce the shame just by telling your story. What is the truth of what has been your experience in terms of acting out, in terms of your woundedness? We're looking at standard recovery stuff, the things we've just mentioned that to us are second nature, of calling people, of working the steps around whatever an issue is, which often is steps 1, 2, and 3, of having boundaries, of knowing, I absolutely have a boundary in my life if I'm not contacting former people that are not healthy for me. So just all of those kinds of things, journaling about it, those basic tools of recovery, and then help women get a sense of who are they? What is their identity? What is their vision for how they want to live life differently? So it's a very comprehensive kind of model, and is just astonishingly effective. Now, like any treatment, someone has got to go home and walk out that journey. But we find that coming to a workshop saves women. It also saves men or the partners who come around a year of just that hard work, week after week, therapy appointment after therapy appointment, of getting that big jump start down the road. And in my book, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, who wouldn't want to get a year jump start on their healing process?
Right. I usually say to people, you can do this recovery thing the hard way or the harder way, because there is not an easy way. There's nothing easy about this. The hardest thing I have ever done in my life was get sober and stay sober. And I unfortunately did that more than one time. But to go, and sometimes people think, I'm not that bad. Why do I need to go to an intensive? Let me just work with my therapist week after week. It doesn't mean that you're worse off than, or more impaired than somebody else. I just think it's an opportunity to get really dedicated, intense kind of healing that just benefits you and benefits your process. So I am glad that you mentioned that we do work with other populations, because by now the program's expanded. So in a gender-specific separate workshop, we work with male sex addicts, and we have a team of men who work with them. I'm part of the workshop, but they're doing their small groups with men. We work with partners. Those are still largely female. I think male partners of female sex addicts probably the most underserved in the population, except for adolescents these days. And then our program is such that at that point they can come back as couples. So our program structured that the addict person and the partner person must come to his or her own individual workshop first, and then they can come back as couples. We're very systemic, and there are people doing good stuff with couples without that kind of process. It's just not what we do. So.
That sounds wonderful, to have the luxury of knowing that they got a very solid foundation in each member of the coupleship before you get into that couples work.
Right.
Two things.
It's wonderful.
Well, I appreciate, again, your candor about you didn't get sober and stay there the whole time. And I think that's, again, part of the other sometimes thing that's hard when I talk about this being temporary, or like I'm so over it or something, is that it seems to minimize how difficult it is. And I don't want to do that. I want to put out a message that is accessible when people are in deep suffering. And so I had a 3-year period. By the time I started identifying I had a problem, and I went into 12-step recovery for sex addiction. And I explored love addiction recovery also, but for me, sex addiction was the paradigm that made the most sense. And it was the recovery that had the most, just this most solid recovery, people getting better in that program. And I really, really wanted that. So that was the paradigm I worked in, was as a sex addict in recovery. Even though I dealt with some of my relational intimacy, love addiction issues there also. but not as much, but I did. But it took me 3 years of walking and falling and walking and falling
Right.
and, sober, relapse. And I don't want to forget that or forget to let people know. Not everybody has that. Some people get in and they're sober and they always stay that way. And especially people in relationships, I just love it when that happens.
Yeah.
But it
And
doesn't
I don't
always.
think that happens too often. I really think there are more stories that this is just so hard. We're struggling with attachment and intimacy, and this is a different animal than substance addiction or even gambling or those kinds of things. It's so much more nuanced. It's so much more elusive.
Well, do you see people ever, down the road, they've come to your intensive, they go back, they write you back? Do you get to hear what happens for them down the road?
Sometimes, and that's always such a joy. I have this, by now it's wonderfully fat file in my office drawer, and it's labeled encouragement.
Oh.
And very often people will, today it's emailed mostly, but sometimes they used to write me letters, and they'll send me pictures of their recovery babies, or they'll send me pictures of their renewing their wedding vows, or of them climbing a mountain and that's representing for them healing, and just telling stories and saying thank you. It's very, very moving and touching. So I don't hear that real often, and I hear it enough to be the encouragement exactly when I need it. So.
Yeah, I have a file like that too. It
Yeah.
has a little smiley face on it. I call it my proud file, and it's people
Oh.
they write in, and I'm so proud of them. And yeah, or send a card or something. It's so sweet. I just, and yeah, when couples get to that stage where they're renewing vows, or sometimes people get, they get divorced and remarried. I've seen that a couple of times over the
Right.
years. That they just had to divorce because the marriage died with the sex addiction, but then they found a way to rekindle the principles, and they remarried. So, or sometimes
And
maybe not.
sometimes for partners especially, I find that healing for them may mean that they leave an active sex addict. Someone who's not willing to enter recovery or won't do the hard work to re-earn and rebuild trust.
Mhm.
That's a healthy step for them, and that's a win too. I don't want us to forget that.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder. I talked about that with Dr. Sherry Keffer
Yeah.
when she was here, and I think, do you find that can be particularly challenging working with people who are in the Christian faith? That sometimes your role might be to challenge somewhat if a relationship is abusive and someone's not getting into recovery, that they need to look at what that means for them and their families, as I could really see that being just such a painful struggle.
Right. Sometimes, it's just interesting, Stacey, as I get older and I do this work more. This probably sounds bad, but I have kind of less patience for some within the religious community who are still just so rigid in their belief systems. I was talking with the pastor last week, and he was talking about, well, he really wanted to try to get his church leadership to embrace a little bit more about recovery. And he said, I said, is there not an S meeting in your town? He said, well, yeah, but it's over at such and such a church. And I said, send people there. Oh no, our leaders won't do that. That's the wrong kind of church. And I'm just like, you know what? I have zero patience for that. I'm so over it. I'm just so over it. So sometimes I am out there, and I am too liberal, or whatever you want to call it, for some of my Christian community, because it's just like, you know what? This is absolutely wrong to tell. Usually it's telling a woman, you need to stay with this guy because he's only looked at pornography. And so you don't have any, quote, spiritual reason, religious reason for a divorce, because he hasn't really committed adultery, which, by the way, is completely wrong, I think, when we look at this in terms of intimacy and attachment. That pornography is a violation of the covenant relationship for most people because it's secret for most people. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to state my truth, and God can sort out all the rest of that.
Yeah, I appreciate. Well, to me, there's certain principles. There's a strategy of how we're all going to get inspired and get our needs met, and but certain principles. If you know that addiction can kill people, or they can
Right.
kill themselves if they don't get help, and you see people who are concerned, not only like don't go. It's not even don't go to that church, but don't go to that church building. Like the 12-step meeting is just taking place in the building. It's not even in the service. And
Right.
and yet people, they may not understand that, or they have their judgments about that, and then somebody doesn't get help, and then they suffer. And so I appreciate your fire around that. As
I'm
someone,
kind of feisty.
you are. You're the quintessential redhead.
I would love if it's okay to tell your viewers about my new book.
Please.
Yes, I had the opportunity to adapt an excellent book originally written by Rob Weiss called Out of the Doghouse, which was for heterosexual men who cheat. And Rob invited me to adapt that book for a Christian audience. And I got to do that, and it came out this spring. And it's called Out of the Doghouse for Christian Men, because Christian men cheat too, of course. So it's taking his great material and just putting it within a Christian context and bringing in some principles, spiritual principles, in a more overt way than the original book had. And I mentioned in this audience first, just because Bethesda Workshops and I also work with men. I would love to write this book for women who cheat, because I think there are some different nuances. So I don't know if that will happen or not, but I do think that women could also benefit from the principles. It's real practical. Here are 7 things you can do that's going to make this situation worse. And here are things you can do that are going to make this situation better. So I'm excited about, we colloquially call it Christian Doghouse, about Out of the Doghouse for Christian Men, that I have co-authored with Rob Weiss, and it's on Amazon. And it's also really helpful for partners. I think, and Rob did this, I just got to build on his great initial work, did a marvelous job of really validating the pain of wives whose husbands were, quote, just looking at pornography or doing all kinds of other things. Really did a great job of getting in there and giving voice to the betrayal that they feel and the craziness that they feel and how they experience that. So I think it's also a very validating and helpful book for partners of people who have been unfaithful in a variety of ways, who, here's what real healing and amends and recovery looks like, as well as get validation for the pain. So thank you for letting me give that shameless self-promotion about that book.
Well, it's thank you for sharing about helping our the viewers find great resources, because one of the things I have out of the Doghouse, I don't have the Christian version yet, but I have to get it because there are things that just are like keys in the lock for people who are used to the language of Christianity.
The language, right.
Yeah, and
right.
so it's wonderful that was adapted. But one of the things I love about that book is it is so practical.
It's very practical, right.
It helps to instill empathy for the person who transgressed. But it's just like, don't do this, do this. Just
right.
kind of in Rob's style, super straightforward.
Right.
And
right. And all of that's still in the new book. So
yeah.
So for someone who wants those healing principles put into their faith language, it can be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wish I had brought one so that I could hold it up, but Amazon is where folks can get it.
Amazon, yes.
Yeah. Do you have one to show us? Oh, I see one right behind you. I see the, I think, is that the original one?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got that one.
Yes.
There it is.
I don't know that you can see it, but it's called Out of the Doghouse for Christian Men.
Out of the Doghouse. See, there's a little dog. Okay, Out of the Doghouse.
Yeah, show your co-host there.
there is a way out. I think that's just the message over and over. We keep
Right.
trying is that if people get in recovery and work on their healing, there's a way out. And I just
Right.
today I had a partner come back after a recommitment ceremony, and their whole community had come out and their vows.
Oh,
She sent me a video of their vows, and they were so beautiful. And it's like, oh, again, it doesn't always work. But when it does, it can be so beautiful, and we get the privilege of seeing that and supporting people to find it. So, wow. Well, let's see. What else was I going to? Oh, I know what else I was going to ask you. This. So, this is an article. I don't know if you can see it.
I can't quite.
Okay.
So tell me about it.
Sorry, over there. This article is Girls Can Have Problematic Sexual Behaviors Too. And it's teen females with problematic sexual behaviors. It's an article you wrote in the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health blog.
Yes, the SASH blog. Yes.
Yep. May 21st, 2018. And I read it and I thought, once again, Marnie's doing her pioneer thing.
Yeah.
And you're just naming it for society. Girls have problems too. There's a lot more articles about how pornography is being seen at a younger age, 9, 10. Kids are hurt by pornography or they get hooked on at a young age. We had someone ask this week on the listserv, I need help for a 10-year-old girl who's compulsively using pornography. Yeah. And
did you notice there were no responses? At least I didn't see any. There's just not good help or resources out there.
I know.
But we're trying to do something about that too. So.
I know. So I want to talk more about that. I did actually respond to him back channel.
Okay, good.
Because there's a book called Not for Kids. I think it's Liz Walker. And
Yes.
so that one, but hardly anything and nothing specifically, because as I think you may know, on my website, stacysprout.com, I have a list of resources for women. And your program is on there at Bethesda. And then I put together one for teens, and everything I put on there was treatment centers that work with teens, but none of them talked about problematic sexual behavior, sexual compulsion.
Right.
And so yours was the first with this article to say, hey, this matters. This happens. Parents are struggling. They don't know how to deal with it, or they're not dealing with it. And so you created what I believe is the first program I've seen anywhere for teen girls. So will you tell us a bit about, or young women, about that?
Right. To our knowledge, again, it is the first program. There is not an inpatient residential program dedicated gender-specific treatment for girls with problematic sexual behavior. There's not one anywhere in the country. I don't think there's one anywhere in the world. There are 2 or 3 within our clinical community, and one is a Christian-based program that are doing really good work with teen males. Mm-hmm. Around drugs and alcohol, but also have CSATs on staff and well-trained people around problematic sexual behavior, but there's nothing for women. Yes. So they can't even go to an inpatient program if that was a viable option for them. So we have developed a program just called Healing for Teens and Parents. And that "and parents" is really critical, because what we're doing at Bethesda workshops is bringing in or inviting people to come in, teens. So the girl, or we have now expanded it actually to do teen males as well. So the teen who is struggling, but also parents must come. Whoever parents are involved in that child's life, if they're married to each other, if they're not, if they're divorced parents, provided they can cooperate for the benefit of this young person and be respectful and looking toward that young person's best interest, all are required to come, because this is a family issue. This is a systemic issue, and you can't just fix the teen. It's a much bigger issue than that. So it's set up as a very engaging workshop. It's our same format, 3.5 days, Wednesday through Saturday. Very engaging for teens. You're not going to sit there and teach them, So there are experiential activities and exercises and different things. And the program goes back and forth between small groups of the teens. And again, they're gender-specific workshops. So either teen girls, or if it's the date for teen males who are meeting together is the design. And while they're doing that, their parents are meeting together in groups. And then they come back and we do family therapy groups where everybody's together. We do some big activities with the whole community together. It's very small. We're only taking 3 to 4 families at a time, is the plan. And then this family gets to do their family sculpt and their different kinds of activities where they have a safe place that's non-judgmental and non-adversarial. So this isn't about the parents are going to berate the kid about here's how you're ruining my life. That's going to come up. We're going to reframe that for here's a problem that this family gets to learn different ways to deal with. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful model. We're super excited about it. We have built it and the clinicians are excited about it. The clergy are excited about it. You know who's not excited about it?
Who?
Parents.
Parents are not excited about it.
Parents are not excited about it. I will be very honest with this audience. Hopefully this won't be true when this Facebook Live is in archives and getting watched in the future. But we have built it and we have had 2 dates come and go where no one has registered. So, and what we hear is, I just want to send Johnny or Janie to you and you send them back. No, that's not going to be helpful. So I find it professionally discouraging. So this is the only thing that I've started, and I don't frame it internally that have failed at it, but that hasn't just worked from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I'm choosing to look at it, Stacy, the way people talk about starting a new meeting. Mm-hmm. And they're going and they're sitting in the church basement for this week and next week and 14 weeks and however long by themselves. And they're doing their own kind of individual meeting and holding that faithful spot. And eventually people start coming. And I really believe that will happen now with this program. I know the need is out there, but to get the word out and then to convince people that it is worth the time and money and investment and hassle to bring your family and invest in healing. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm really anxious to actually do it.
Yeah, let's get some families over to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Well, I hold that vision with you, and I have faith that
maybe some of your viewers will know of families, and we've got very extensive information on our website, or have them call us. We've got 2 more dates this year. One is in mid-August, and it's actually for teen males. So we're ready.
Awesome. What I love about your model, I think about myself, my problem started when I was young.
Yes.
And
yes.
around sexual abuse experiences and sexual reenactments and
right.
hypersexuality, just tons of boundary problems and very little understanding. It
Sure.
Instinctual, compulsive. And so I could see either, nobody knows what's going on and nobody gets help, which was my situation, or somebody notices what's going on and says, okay, well, what's wrong with her? Let's ship her off and, get her better. And to have the whole family go, okay, we're all going to go. But even then, there can still be a certain amount, like in my family, some of what we've processed has been covert sexual abuse. So sexual
right.
humor, inappropriate nudity, things that were harmful, but not obvious at all. Like everybody
right.
did that, I mean, that's just the culture. Of course I had Playboy lying around or whatever. So parents not wanting to be blamed or shamed. And what an amazing opportunity for them to get to go and hang out with other parents and say, we're
right.
not the only family
right.
that's dealing with this. And maybe I made some mistakes, but that guy did too, or that mom did too. And they're obviously good people, and we're all just trying here. And so I love the community that you're bringing
right.
these families into. It's just fantastic. And I'm really encouraged. So hang in there.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll just say our prayers that the right people find you and get the help that they need. Because back to the prevalence, we were trying to, I'm fumbling over the numbers, but it's like, if we know it's in the millions of women, those women had to be teens at some point.
That's exactly right.
And with how women are finding pornography early and earlier in their childhoods, I mean, we just know that this is growing. So we want to turn that around. Yes. So that's what you're doing. Is well, I think that's all my questions. We're at this for about an hour, and I'm just wondering, is there anything else? I'm so grateful again to you for your time and being with us, your gracious presence, and your passion and fire, and just love for what you do. Is there anything else you would want to share with us?
I think again, Stacy, just to reiterate, hard stuff happens. Addiction is hard. Abuse is hard. Culture is hard. Family dysfunction is hard. But healing happens too. And it's God has redeemed my pain in amazing, amazing, very specific, targeted ways all across my life and my work. And I am grateful. And I am grateful to get to be parts of these kinds of events that are hopefully giving encouragement to other people.
Well, we've had many faces floating by on Facebook as you've been talking. You can't see those, but lots of hearts and encouraging little
Well,
faces.
I send hearts back.
Aw, hearts back. Okay. Well, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again
Thank
for
you.
being here, for your time. And I'll say to the viewers, thank you for being with us on Facebook Live. We have just one more show. Next week is our last show on this sex addiction in the news. And that will be Eric Vesterling, and he's going to talk about his experience as a wounded healer, a male sex addict in long-term recovery, 18 years sober, and just dealing with toxic masculinity in the culture and what recovery has to say about that. So hope you'll join us next week for that finale show. And if you are watching on YouTube, thanks so much. I'm glad to have you here with us there. Will be. And so that's all our show for tonight. I am Stacy Sprout signing off with Marnie Ferree, and I will end with may you feel loved, may you feel cherished, and may you love and cherish others. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody.